In 1999, George Mathewson, the then CEO of the Royal Bank of Scotland, was looking for a successor. After reviewing a number of candidates, he chose Fred Goodwin, the CEO of Clydesdale Bank. Mathewson liked Goodwin's intelligence and confidence, prompting him to offer him the job of CEO of RBS. Goodwin had originally trained as an accountant at Touche Ross, now known as Deloitte. He was focused on systematically cutting costs, earning him the nickname Fred the Shred. As Fred said himself, his name doesn't rhyme with charming and considerate, showing his ruthless attitude. His reorganisation of the Clydesdale Bank came at a time when RBS was in transition, making him an excellent candidate to continue the bank's transformation. He was offered the role of Finance Director and Deputy Chief Executive at the Royal Bank of Scotland. In 1999, smaller rival Bank of Scotland made a bid for English rival NatWest. RBS decided that they could make their own takeover bid to ensure they remained Scotland's largest bank and didn't have to fend off a takeover bid themselves. Goodwin was pivotal to the bid, writing the takeover document which set out 111 cost-cutting initiatives that would occur once the takeover was formalised. At the age of 42, Fred Goodwin became the CEO of RBS. In just 6 years, he had risen from an unknown accountant to running the third biggest bank in Britain. He was appointed CEO in 2000. After acquiring NatWest, Goodwin and RBS embarked on a series of 26 mergers over several years across Europe and the United States. RBS believed that they could buy other companies and make them more efficient before moving on to the next deal. They would go on to make a number of multi-billion-pound acquisitions over the coming years. Goodwin certainly had an abrasive style, creating a fear and blame culture amongst employees, with the former head of division saying that working under Goodwin was like going to war, and his attitude did not help the company in the long run. He was named International Businessman of the Year by Forbes in 2000, a major accolade in the cutthroat world of banking. The company's success meant that RBS paid the Labour government over £800 million in tax, funding their spending spree in the mid-2000s. They also made donations, which reduced regulations and allowed RBS to continue on their trail of global expansion. In June 2004, Goodwin was knighted for his services to banking. And by 2005, RBS was the world's fifth largest bank, operating in 27 countries, with over half of its profits coming from the US after buying several American banks who profited from the subprime mortgage market. More on this later. In the same year, Goodwin moved RBS from its historic Edinburgh headquarters to the new base in Goulburn at a cost of £350 million. The Queen opened the building and the RAF had a flypast, something usually reserved for royal occasions. Goodwin oversaw the design of the building and was obsessed with the detail. When rumours surfaced that Goodwin was planning to build a private road to Edinburgh Airport, he began legal proceedings against the Sunday Times. In 2007, RBS recorded record profits of £9 billion, much of which came from the US investment bank Greenwich Capital and from their mortgage market division. They took large risks and made exceptional returns, but the mortgage market was beginning to take a turn. Not many felt that there was a problem, and Goodwin was confident for the future of RBS. In April 2007, RBS paid €71 billion, mainly in cash, to acquire Dutch bank ABN AMRO, becoming the world's largest bank by assets with £2.2 trillion. However, this left RBS with very little money to operate, meaning they would be reliant on short-term borrowing if they ran out of money. Goodwin's ego played a major part in the deal as he wanted to beat Barclays and gain the title of the world's largest bank. However, Goodwin and RBS's growth came at a cost. They had grown too big too quickly, and cracks were beginning to show. Even Goodwin struggled to control and manage an empire so vast, with so many complex businesses operating under one roof. The company was operating with limited cash and needed to borrow short-term from banks to ensure they could stay in business. This was a suicidal move and came right as markets began to move against them. RBS had significant exposure to CDOs as Greenwich Capital a specialist in mortgages, began to hemorrhage cash. As the subprime market took hold, Goodwin attempted to raise £12 billion from shareholders through a rights issue, selling cut-price shares in the bank. Nobody thought they might lose their money in a little over 6 months. After the US investment bank Lehman Brothers collapsed, lending between banks fell, cutting RBS's supply of short-term capital it needed to supply. The British government was already preparing themselves for a potential bank bailout after monitoring the situation, but the speed of RBS's demise took them by surprise. Judgments that often took days had to be made in just 30 minutes to ensure the bank stayed in business. Panic spread across the markets as many were concerned that if RBS failed, other British banks would go, creating a domino effect. In order to prevent this, the British Treasury agreed to underwrite losses of up to £500 billion to secure the banking system. It showed the British government would do whatever it took to protect the banking system and gave confidence that the system would be operating as normal, with customers being able to access cash from cash machines and ATMs. The government also planned to buy shares in any bank that may collapse using taxpayers' money, taking them into public ownership. This plan was radical, and if it failed, there was nothing that could be done to save the banking system. The plan had to be carried out by Friday the 8th of October 2008, before markets opened. Goodwin was very anti the government taking a major stake in RBS, as he would no longer be in charge. However, they had reached a point where they had to borrow money overnight to stay in business, repay it the next day, and try and borrow it again the day after to stay afloat. The markets were unwilling to lend to RBS for a matter of hours. If they did not receive a bailout, the bank would go out of business at the end of the day. They needed the Bank of England to offer the company a bailout. The government had only 24 hours to save the British economy. A meeting was called at the Treasury on the 7th of October to agree a bailout deal to protect the banking system. The banking heads had no idea what the government planned to do. In order to calm markets, they proposed that all banks publicly sign up to a £50 billion package of capitalisation. RBS would be the largest recipient of the money, and the government would become its major shareholder. The banks wanted to negotiate the shares that the government would receive, but it was clear that they had little option but to accept it, otherwise their share prices would crash. The negotiations ran into the night, with a large order of chicken balti being placed to feed those involved in the bailout. At midnight, none of the banking chiefs had signed the deal, and the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Alistair Darling, left the Treasury to try and force them to agree. By 2 a.m, everybody except Goodwin had signed the deal, but he had little choice and eventually gave in at 5 a.m. Darling then announced the bailout before markets opened with $25 billion worth of bailout funds, with a further $25 billion to come in the future. As part of the bailout, Fred Goodwin was forced to resign as head of RBS. The company made a loss of over £24 billion in 2008, which is the largest annual loss in corporate history. Despite resigning, he kept his £700,000 a year pension, although when under pressure from the government, he agreed to give up a third of his pension, and in 2012 he was stripped of his knighthood. RBS needed to borrow £25 billion, but the Bank of England felt they would need much, much more. RBS had also secretly received government bonds from the Bank of England, which they could sell on the market in return for cash, which helped to solve their money problems. In total, £36 billion was lent to the company in the short term. While Goodwin is the man who is blamed for the collapse of RBS, the board members and regulators must also shoulder some of the blame. Fred Goodwin alone was not responsible for the crisis. Only the head of investment at RBS was banned from taking another city job, with Goodwin and other board members walking away without punishment. The government bailout of the banking sector cost over £1 trillion. Goodwin now keeps a low profile, playing golf at Archfield Links just outside of Edinburgh. Despite his apology over the collapse of RBS, he still shows a lack of remorse and humility, blaming others for what happened. He believes that if he had not been removed as CEO, then things would have been resolved, and RBS would be back to where it was.